Welcome, Sandra, to Beyond the Lecture. Thanks for coming to campus to give the lecture tonight.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, thank you. I want to start just by kind of asking you how you got into theology. I always find this is such an interesting question, and very few people get there directly.
And I suspect that my story is going to be even more unusual. So I grew up all over the country, but the place that I ended up when I graduated from high school was Oklahoma. I went to the University of Oklahoma. Boomer Sooner. Sorry, Texans. I realize that's a little
we can edit that out, yeah.
And I had a scholarship in physics. And I was Catholic, so I got involved in what was then the Newman Club at the University of Oklahoma. And there was a priest there named Father Joe Ross. And he was a graduate of the Greg. He had been at the Greg during the council, during the Second Vatican Council. Yeah. He graduated top of his class. And he was a wonderful person.
Yeah.
And he would do these funny things, like he would pull out Lonergan's Insight and he would read parts of it, and he would just break into laughter, because in that it's like in the 42nd place,
yes.
Right? And so he would read it, and I was like, this is really interesting.
That is not a funny book.
No, but it was kind of funny in that way,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And so I thought, this is really interesting. I had no idea you could study theology, first of all. I was doing fine in physics. I made it through the first year. I did not flunk out of physics. I guess I always want to say I didn't it wasn't like a consolation prize. And I remember very clearly being in this class on electricity, on electrons, which is part of thinking about physics. And I just was struck by, okay, here are these things that we call electrons, and they go and they light up cities, right?
Yeah.
And it was like amazing. But these physics professors had no sense that this was amazing. And so that kind of got me thinking about these questions so it's a kind of cosmological question, which physics shares, but I wanted to come at it from a different way. So my family's working class. I could not afford to go to any private institution. So then what I did was I looked at Notre Dame's theology undergraduate degree, and I tried to match courses at the University of Oklahoma that would kind of align with that.
Really?
And I worked with this priest, Father Ross, and this philosophy professor, Tom Boyd, and created a Catholic studies program at the University of Oklahoma.
That's brilliant.
And so I believe I'm probably the first and the only person to graduate with a Catholic studies degree from the University of Oklahoma. So I took courses in intellectual history. I took a whole kind of historically organized series in philosophy. And then I did some directed readings through Professor Boyd, but under the tutelage of Father Ross in liturgy, Christology.
And you just created the program in consultation with them. Yeah.
And I mean, I got it approved by the College of Arts and Sciences there. So that's how I came into
That is amazing.
Theology.
Yeah. I was a math major in undergrad, and it's amazing how many people come through math and sciences.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the cosmological question, which is fascinating, but it was the epistemological one. I was getting at these things, and the course for me was always complex analysis, right? Because it's calculus for imaginary numbers, square root of -1. How is this real? And yet it works, and getting to think about those things. Took some philosophy classes in the core curriculum, and suddenly I'm like, this is amazing.
Yes. Yes. And just one other thing. And so, and my theological question at the time was what does it mean to say that Jesus Christ died for my sins?
Yeah.
How do you make sense of that? Right. Yeah. Which is kind of fundamental to Christian world. And I was talking to Father Ross, and so the first book I read in theology as a sophomore in college was Karl Rahner's The Theology of Death.
Oh, okay, yeah. I thought
Which,
you were going to say
yes.
like some of his earlier stuff, which is
No.
pretty. It's brilliant, but dense. Yeah, but
Yeah. And that kind of, and I began
okay.
to see, oh, okay, like this whole kind of anthropological approach, thinking about history. So that's how I got into it.
Yeah, it's also I got into Lonergan, which was my direction, but it was that there was something about the way that Lonergan wrote in the 42nd place, but that sort of mathematical framework that spoke to me, and what it did is unlock so many of these theological ideas that I had questions about, cared a lot about, but now here's a framework, here's a perspective, here's a way to approach that question that really makes sense to me. Yes. Yeah, I think that was the beauty of that age of like Ronner and Lonergan of bridging the broader tradition from the Middle Ages, but also like not being stuck there, but also trying to think about the modern context in those developments. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So after you graduated from the Catholic Studies program at Oklahoma, where did you go next? Yeah.
Well, and then for 2 years I was a youth minister.
Oh.
So I did
in Oklahoma.
In Oklahoma, in a parish in Oklahoma City,
mm-hmm.
and then I wanted to go on and do some theological work. And this was this was like in the late 70s.
Okay.
And it was unusual still at that time for a lay woman.
Yeah.
Because I never considered joining a women's religious community. And so I then began to apply at different places with my Catholic Studies degree from the University of Oklahoma. And I was accepted at places. And then Marquette offered me some support. And they offered it first. And so I ended up going to Marquette University, which was great. It was really good for me.
Good. Did you know the field? When I left, undergrad as math and philosophy, did a year of service, and I was like applying to grad schools, and I was like, who's giving me money?
That's exactly what I was thinking. And I'm older than you, so even at that, and my parents were, my father graduated from high school, and my mother graduated from high school. They had no college education. Yeah. They had no idea what you're going to study, kind of thing. Now, they were never against it. Yeah. But they really were not going to be able to guide me. It's very unlike what is today. And I mean, it is funny because I do tell students, when I started at the University of Oklahoma, it was $14 a credit hour. And they're like, what? And I said, yeah. And then it went up to $17 a credit hour. Yeah. So, my father on his working class salary could afford to send me to the University of Oklahoma, which I affectionately say is the Harvard of Oklahoma. But, but I got a great education there. I have no regrets about going there. Yeah, it was I tell two stories when I talk to students because I have such sympathy for the financial dynamics. Oh my goodness, yes. And I've got kids going to college too. But one was my grandfather who graduated high school and retired as vice president of a bank with a high school degree. Like that route was possible. He was smart. He was really good with math, knew numbers, like understood things, had a bunch of experiences and worked hard for years. And that's where he landed. And now like you don't get a job, not even as a teller without a bachelor's degree. And then my dad was sort of like what you explained. He would go to college. He would come home and work in the summer, a little bit of tobacco fields, a little bit helping his mom run her business. She didn't have a degree. And then he was like, I never want to work in tobacco again. But that was he worked for 2 months and then the whole year was paid for. And that was like room and board and tuition and food. And that was it. And then that's nowhere like that. That's just impossible to think about in those terms. And you had a certain freedom and flexibility that I think lamentably is not possible now. Yeah, when the price tag narrows your vision. Yeah. I'll save that for the end when I ask you to predict the future of Catholic higher education. But did you do your master's and your PhD at Marquette? I did, and I actually didn't officially get a master's. I just went straight through to the PhD. Did they make you take? I had to fly in one summer, take comps, and that was like between my second and third year of coursework. Nothing, just straight PhD. Straight PhD. I mean, I had to take the exams at the end of the doctoral program. Yeah. And that's where I got I thought I was going to do something in scripture and ethics, and then when I realized what, at that time, no offense to my friends who do scripture studies, it just wasn't. I just thought, oh, come on. I mean, I'm sorry. It's
yes.
and there was a very strong historical theology dimension at Marquette, and that's what I got interested in almost immediately. I took a course from Pat Carey, Dr. Carey, who did work in American Catholic studies, theology, and I just found that fascinating, and so that's how I ended up doing work primarily, at least in terms of my kind of initial research, and that was in American Catholic.
I was thinking, like, definitely I was tracing back to like the early 70s, late 70s, early 80s, like both scriptures. I mean, you had giants in the field, but most of that field was like the scripture and the ethics were like very narrowly focused on like either minor textual issues or like, you're parsing out like,
this
confessional manuals.
Is from the D source. And I'm like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
Seriously?
And ethics was like also like imbued, definitely 80s was starting that up, but it was this debates about, between Kern and McCormick and all of those sort of individuals about this natural law debate and really technical sort of terms, which was pretty cool in graduate school. But at the end of it, you're like, wait, what are we doing?
Yeah, that was sort of, it wasn't even cool for me in graduate school. I'm sorry. I mean, I appreciate those that do that work, but I was just like,
What part of historical theology did you focus on?
Well,
as you kind of made your way towards the end of the program.
I mean, it really was a focus on Catholicism in the United States, and sort of at that time consideration of like immigrant culture. I ended up, so I think it was the first course I took with Dr. Carey. He made this kind of like a side comment about how during the Civil War, there were political cartoons that portrayed Lincoln as the Pope. And I'm like, what?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and I ended up, my dissertation was on the papacy in mid-19th century American Catholic imagination. And so it was really about how, not so much like what the Pope was actually doing in a sense, but much more about how American Catholics talked about the Pope, because at the time there was a lot of, as is evident in the critics of Lincoln, who portrayed him as the Pope.
I know this is a terrible criticism of him.
He was this despot. And the ways that Protestants talked about Catholics is that they were like the minions of this foreign despot, the Pope. And I mean, it is very interesting. And, I still do some work in that area. At the time, I just had no sense, so I'm like going through a mid-19th century newspaper, and there's this headline, Pope declares war, because 1848, that's when the Italian Revolution and the end of the Papal States, that is all unfolding in that time. So it's really about how these public figures, Catholic figures like Orestes Brownson, Martin Spalding, and those try to present the Pope to an American audience.
Ah, that's interesting.
And so, so the Pope is like the savior of Western civilization. The Pope is the defender of republicanism. The Pope is, so there's this argument made about papal infallibility. That's a kind of common sense argument that fit into the ways in which others kind of talked about knowledge in terms of this, and this is a more technical term, really, common sense realism. And so really talking about the way in which the papacy was portrayed to try to make it clear that Catholics could fit very well into the American way.
Trying to respond in some ways to the prejudices and the assumptions about what is going on there.
Right, because Catholics were called papists. Yeah. So then they tried to sort of, we are papists, and we're going to tell you what that really means, is one way to think about that.
It's so funny, because I would never, when I was growing up, I wouldn't have ever put that context into place. But I grew up in Kentucky, so we had tons of churches, like small town, but tons of churches, and our Catholics were missionary sort of territory. Yes. And that sort of suspicion, even like amongst good friends, and it wasn't like, didn't affect relationships, but there was this assumption about like, okay, we got to watch out for that little piece there. And I do remember too thinking, we're Christian like everybody else, except for we have this Pope over here.
Yes.
And that was my perception going into that piece.
And I think, because I lived for the first few years of my life in Iowa, in a German Catholic neighborhood, and then we'd go visit my grandmother, who lived in an ethnic neighborhood in Omaha, Nebraska. So like they were Lithuanians. So, if you read The Jungle, the Meat Packers, that's my family.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So, and then when we moved to Texas and then Oklahoma, of course, in Oklahoma, Catholics are by far the minority. There were only, I think, less than 4% Catholics in all of Oklahoma when I lived there. It's more now, partly because of so many people from various countries in Central and South America have moved into that area. But at the time, and so I think that also played a role in my being interested in that, because Catholics were seen as, they worshipped idols, they had,
they worship Mary, all of those kinds of criticisms that came in. I want to come back to your sort of professional journey, but I was also thinking in the back of my head is I think a comment by Bill Portier, which is that when you move into the 21st century and you have this almost increasing centralizations around like John Paul II, that's also facilitated around the new media, like the internet, and where now documents are not just you receive and get printed and you buy from a bookstore, they're published on the website and you access them that way. Can you speak a little bit about that change, like how they're presenting the Pope in those early ages, and then how the Pope is perceived in that era? So I guess I'm like 80s, 90s.
I think that, and that was also part of my interest, because it seemed like, post-Vatican II Catholics, everything seemed to be around the Pope, either for or against. Right? So I'm not saying everyone was saying, one of the things I would say is that a lot of people who aren't Catholic would say, when the Pope says jump, you say how high, right? Yeah. But of course, if you were in the Catholic community, especially in the late 70s and 80s, that was hardly the case, right? There was lots of debate. And so one of the things that is striking, and I did notice this as I was doing my research, as you get later into the 19th century, and this is going to be a kind of long way around to the question, you see more and more focus on papal documents. Because before that, it was more, the Pope doing things, if you will, more than promulgating documents. Yeah. And then by the time you get to someone like Leo XIII, and of course then these key documents that we still refer to, like Rerum Novarum,
like Catholic social teaching, at the beginning,
much more important. So when you look at someone like for example, in the early part of the century, there was Francis Patrick Kenrick, Irish, born Irish, came to the United States, was the bishop in Philadelphia during the riots, the anti-Catholic riots, and then became the Archbishop of Baltimore, the primatial see, right, of the United States. And when he would talk about the papacy, it was much more kind of, I'm going to call it, this is not quite accurate, but storytelling about what the Pope did. Mm-hmm. So it would talk about things like defending the papal territories, for example. And you can trace, he has several editions of this book on the primacy of the papacy. And the way he talks about the papal states changes after the sort of, after the revolutions in Italy. in which he then sort of defends them much more strongly, but where before he sort of downplayed that and emphasized other aspects. But then when you get to someone like Isaac Hecker, who was late in the century, you begin to see more the kinds of discussions about these documents that the papacy is, that the Pope is promulgating. Yeah. And so then I think that's where you see then the shifts, where we have much more of a focus on documents, encyclicals, apostolic exhortations. Now, then, and especially that was true with popes like, and I'm thinking here primarily of Paul VI. Yeah. Now, one of the things that you see with John Paul II is that he was very media savvy. And I mean that in the most generous way. I don't mean it in a cynical way. Yeah. He was an actor. He was aware of this. And I think you began to see more of that kind of acting on the world stage in ways that, but of course, then he had like scads and scads. That's a technical term, but documents, right? Yeah. So it is this, and now we have all of these, instantaneous images that we can find. And then, of course, there are memes and AI. I guess they're producing things that
with the like Pope Francis with the big puffy coat, right? Like you can have all of those things, and then even every off the cuff kind of comment is also reported and becomes news instantaneously. Yeah, it's a very that's just so interesting to me for a bunch of reasons. One, it's a transformation of the papacy from like being a political actor in many ways to like, all right, now if you don't have that power, how do you have power on the stage? And it is by your presence and your teachings, right? And so that sort of shifts. And then, but it also got me wondering if the emphasis on texts also plays well in the United States, where most of like Protestant Christianity emphasizes the Bible as the primary sort of source. That it just got me think of. I didn't know if that was like not apologetics, that's not the word, but like if you're trying to speak about what's important, and that might be a language that is connects up to people.
I would say that in terms of papal influence, and I think Bill Portier would agree with me on this, losing the Papal States was the most advantageous thing that could have happened, because the Pope wasn't one ruler among. I mean, there is Vatican City, and it is officially a state, and you can walk across it in, I don't know, 15 minutes? I'm not sure, if you're slow. But then that, in a sense, freed the papacy from, like they were constantly like trying to curry favor with the French to protect the Papal States, or curry favor with the Habsburgs, So I think that, in a sense, really did free the papacy. And so in some ways, its authority became even more important. Yeah. Who do they talk about their Christmas message on secular news sources? Yeah. It's the Pope.
Yeah. Where if he's a ruler of a particular state, it's like, why are you reporting this one as opposed to sort of somebody else? Yeah. I sometimes feel like we should revisit that history in maybe the medieval era and the times before, to remind people like there was times when the church was more aligned politically and it didn't work out, and that's probably why we developed that teaching to be like, it's better to stay separate.
Yes, yes, I think that's true. And one of the arguments that the Americans made in defense of the Pope needing some territory for independence, they used Washington, D.C. as an example. And in fact, they suggested that as the Founding Fathers were thinking about how should we do this, their gaze turned across the Atlantic and they saw, and they thought, of course, this is what we. So, according to some of them, inspiration for D.C. came from the Pope, the papacy. So, just so you know,
that's a good argument. Oh, I love that. That's fantastic.
And they were serious.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's so, I mean, I'm trying to figure out why I'm laughing. It's so like an unexpected kind of argument. You're so unfamiliar.
Yes,
like the founding stories are not anyway connected to that sort of narrative. And so it's like that funny of like, that's surprising and like unexpected.
Yes.
So, oh, good. So how'd you end up, you eventually got to Dayton. How'd you get from Marquette graduate school, PhD, over to Dayton?
So I was hired at Loyola, now University of Maryland, in Baltimore, and I taught there for 2 years as I like to describe myself, a militant Midwesterner. I just did not care for living. I was married and had a couple of kids. It was just like one of my husband, he grew up in New Jersey, and he has friends who calls that whole area the land of inconvenience. And and so a job opening came open at St. Mary's in South Bend. I think there's another university in South Bend. I can't quite remember what it is. But St. Mary's.
My wife graduated from St. Mary's. She would appreciate you not remembering the other university.
A fantastic place to teach, and that was wonderful. I loved teaching there, and I have a great fondness for St. Mary's. And then the University of Dayton was beginning a doctoral program with a focus on what they came to describe it as the U.S. Catholic experience, and that's my area of expertise. And so I was invited to apply for a position there, and that's how I came to the University of Dayton. And I helped fashion this doctoral program that's been in existence for about 20 years.
It's pretty influential. I know I'm going to bring together two lines here. Both I know one of your works was the history of the College Theology Society, former president of the society, and then being on Dayton's campus with the College Theology Society last year, I was reminded of how influential the University of Dayton's graduate theology department was, and then their graduate program was, in shaping the contours, I think, of theology. You've got, some big universities, a lot of them are Jesuit and sort of wonderful. You got the South Bend contingent, you had a Duke contingent for a while, but there was something I always think of like a ballast at the University of Dayton that was sort of intellectually very rich and rigorous, but also a little bit of a different position that enabled conversations across all of those boundaries.
And that was part of how we envisioned that program is one of the ways, I think this came from Terry Tilley, that theology was at the center of this web of disciplines, and recognizing the importance of having some kind of sociological understanding of the world, and really a kind of historical awareness of our situatedness. I think that I'm pretty sure. Has it happened already? I mean, I think John Henry Newman could be seen as sort of a light in this way, in a different way, because of his sense of the historical. And I think, isn't Leo going to name him a doctor of the church?
I think
I've heard it's coming.
Yeah, I think it's Monday.
Oh, is it Monday?
It's somewhere really, really close, around the corner.
That. And so to think about it that way, and I think it's funny because a lot of our students will say, I can't think of any sort of theological thing without thinking about its context. It's important to understand that Jesus lived in the era of the Second Temple, and that shaped some of the ways in which he was able to communicate with those around him. It's just not surprising. We talk to people in the way that we talk to people, in the sense of we come out of a particular culture, and we that doesn't minimize the sort of that particularity expresses something of the universality of what we're thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, that's my approach, and I'm so sympathetic to that as well. And the best framing that helped me to think through that was a colleague said, well, in the Middle Ages, they relied on philosophy, but it was because it was the best science of the time. Yes. This was their understanding of how communities work and human beings work and how psychology works and all of those pieces. And that is why you kind of attended to it. And that the modern equivalent is all of those sort of historical pieces, the sociology and psychology, to help you to understand not those fields per se, but what is our best understanding of the human being in their context, and that theology arises out of that.
And to be able to communicate with others who may, let's say, focus more exclusively on a sociological explanation of something, and could tend to be a little reductive at times, as if that explained everything. So it's helpful to be familiar too, because we want to be in conversation.
Yeah, I remember I was doing research I did a lot of stuff on hookup culture and sex and marriage and family, but I remember reading all of these sociological studies, these psychological. It was really insightful, very, very well done, and very helpful. But I did notice that there's a constraining of what they could say, because why they were interested in it, what conclusions they could draw, had to be circumscribed by the field that they were operating in. So you could talk about health concerns, physical health concerns, mental health concerns. If you're talking about hookup culture, you were talking about, risk to matriculation, but talking about it in terms of like good and bad, right or wrong, healthy. You could get maybe to healthy relationships, but you had to like be careful as you're veering into some moral statements. Right. And it wasn't like it didn't weaken the scholarship, but you were kind of missing a conversation about what would be good. What does this say about relationships? What does it say about sort of the nature of what's sort of going on? Right. And that was a conversation I found, like, oh, I can have them, but I can have this other conversation too in theology. And it's better informed in theology because of those conversations.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, good. So this gets me to the question, tonight you're going to be speaking on prayer. And one of the reasons I invited you is you're not only working on a book on prayer, but you've developed a class on prayer to sort of talk to students. Because can you talk about why you developed that class, what it's responding to, what draws students in?
I mean, I have had a long interest in prayer. Mm-hmm. And praying. I sometimes say it's not just about prayer, it's about praying. I mean, personally, I have an interest. I hope many people have an interest. But I got the opportunity because we have this program called the Chaminade Scholars. Because we're both Marianists, we know Chaminade. And their first course is a course on it was initially called the Christian Tradition of Prayer. It's called, I think, Faith Traditions Prayer. But, and so it made sense for me to teach it because I have a lot of historical knowledge and I've, read mystics. And so over the course of the time, I've developed this course, and I started out with maybe, having students read a lot, excerpts from different mystics and so on. But as the course developed, I remember we were doing this backward design, for course objectives. Yeah. And I was like, and so someone said, well, what is it, and one of my goals, I'll say, is to help students think about how to pray. Yeah. So with that in mind, and this was probably the biggest change in this course, and I really think it is what transformed the course, this may sound overly pious or something, but I think it's the work of the Holy Spirit that I began to require students to explore prayer practices. Mm-hmm. And so then that kind of shaped the other things that I did in the course, giving them books that would help them think about prayer practices and books that are more accessible. So students will say, oh, like last semester I had a student. So let me back up and say, so what I do is, and it sounds really odd, is I require students to pray. So they can choose, like I've had an atheist in this course, and I gave him many other options, and he chose to do a sort of form of the daily examen.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because he could review his day, talk about, so people, there are lots of people that
what are the joys? What are
So he found it very valuable. I mean, he was able to reflect on his day. So I'm just saying, it's not that I'm making you do a particular kind of prayer. They have lots of options, though I try to encourage them to explore things, prayers that they haven't done. And so they're in 5-week increments, basically 3 times, and they can do the same prayer. They can pray an Our Father in an intentional way. And then I ask them to do a little reflection on it, and then to write what I call a meta-reflection. So they go back over what they've written about their experience. And I'm sure some students don't do it exactly the way.
Yeah.
But it has really transformed the class. And the students will say, you know, this is, I mean, I've had students, like I read their things, and sometimes I'm like, whoa, this is like, you know, and I'm very cautious. And if I see issues, I might suggest, you know, you know, pursue a more, you know, like maybe go see someone in the council or something. Though I've rarely had that, but for them, it really opens up for them. And these are students who are kind of all in. Many of these students, but they'll say, I just had no idea. I could all these different ways I could pray, and these are really, you know. So it's very traditional too. It's like Lectio Divina, Ignatian contemplation, the prayer of quiet.
Yeah.
Go to mass and pay attention. I mean, they can do that, or go to, if you're not out of a Catholic tradition, go to your service, pay attention, reflect on it a little bit. So I give them a lot of opening, and then the kind of readings we have are much more accessible. And I've used a wide variety of readings. I usually end the course with a book by Martin Laird, one of his books. He's an Augustinian who teaches at Villanova.
Okay.
So when I first came across this book when I was going through a difficult time, and the book was really helped me a lot. And it really addresses these issues of how we have our minds, you know, like we can try to be quiet, but our minds are churning.
Yeah.
And he really talks about that a lot. And I think it's from his experience of teaching at Villanova. And he even at times gives kind of vague examples from students. And so I usually end with that book, and I laugh, I joke with the students, this is the most practical book, and a lot of them will say yes. But so just to say that became the focal point in some ways. The students are asked to take a turn leading the class in prayer when we begin the class. And then the other thing we do, it is notorious, we usually read anywhere from 6 to 8 books in the class. So this is not an easy A class. It is if you do the work, and most of them do the work. So they read. I ask them to do some kind of, sometimes we do these things which the students came to call CCQs, which are comments, connections, questions.
Okay.
So they make, what's this, what do you think are some big ideas in this reading? How do you connect? And oftentimes I'll have them read 2 things together and say, what's the connection between this and this? Because, you know, that helps them really think in ways that if they're just reading one thing, they don't quite think about it the same way. And I mean, for me too, it's really opened up things. And then what questions do you have? And I organize it around these 7 questions, like the first, a very immodest question, which is, who is God? And I mean, I say, you know, who am I? Who's my neighbor? How do these relate? What is prayer? What is vocation? How does this relate? Rely on scripture and tradition? And then, given all that we've talked about, how does it lead us to commitments to justice, to social justice and peacemaking? So it's those kinds of questions that, and I ask them, what question do you think this most addresses from the course? So, and again, I'll say it can be, you can see it as somewhat pedantic, but it gives them ways to organize, and it helps them then bring it together.
It's both the engagement with the text, but also the reflection back upon those things, because you're trying to just, here's what the text says, and I've got that, but like, here's a it fits into this broader conversation. Can you think about that broader conversation? And that seems to me also to make sense of the diversity of practices that are occurring within the students, right? Like you're trying to get that reflection on the experiences, trying to see the value of this experience, but then also introducing them to this broad, rich history of thought on it. And then the cognitive piece of reflecting back upon both of those things in conversation with her. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Like
And so, I mean, you know, then I do read everything. And I mean, I've had students say, which makes me a little nervous, they'll say, I read every comment that you write, Dr. Yocum. And I'm like, okay, just don't, you know, remember, I'm only a human being. Remember that. You know, but for them, I mean, I've had, like, I haven't used it recently, but the book, I'll mention it tonight. The Return of the Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen.
Oh yeah, that was a very powerful book for me.
It is it's really, like, I met a student who was probably my student maybe 7 or 8 years ago at some event, and I didn't recognize her because she's all grown up now and everything, but she said, oh, yeah, I just finished reading The Return of the Prodigal Son. I said, really? She said, yeah, I read it every year. And so she's read it.
Every year since the class.
Or I've had a student wrote me to thank me for the class and said, I didn't think I knew, I didn't enjoy reading. I didn't know how to read, but you have taught me how to read. And he's a really, really good student. I mean, he's an honor student.
Yeah.
So that means a lot to me as a teacher. And yet at the same time, they also will say, I've had other students say, I didn't think I liked to read, but I guess I was reading the wrong books.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, we read a wide variety of things, and some of them, I've used this for a long time, Modern Spiritual Masters, which Robert Ellsberg edited, and it's 12 people that he selected who are both, who are activists and also contemplatives, prayers, P-R-A-Y, apostrophe, dash.
Prayers,
people who pray. And, the students just love these, and some of them are just people I had never heard of, like, and so.
Yeah, I would think like it's bringing together a few things that you don't find a lot in academia, which is it's both like this sense of like, oh, it's either thoughtfulness or action, and so you're able to sort of bring those things together. It is this the mind, but also this fuller human person that's there. And I think the reading piece too, like it's the reading that, what captivates me, I think what captivates lots of people about reading is it's something that like draws you in. And the trick, I don't mean like deception, but like the hook is that if you can find those books that speak to what's hungering, what's driving people, like then you like pour through this stuff. And just two examples that it's making me think of, like my daughter struggled with reading. We eventually, discovered she was dyslexic, and it was just like the spelling tests and the readers. Like this was just like a punishment. And then that was like elementary school. So now she's graduated college, and she's like pouring through these, like, the bigger the tome, the more joy she has, and it's just this kind of like, because finally she was like. She's like, oh, I remembered that I like stories. I remember that I like to read and I like to think. And so that really drew her in. And when you get it, it is speaking to something that's really deep and powerful. And then my other one, just thinking about your course, because I feel like sometimes people will want to dismiss a course that's focusing on prayer.
Oh yeah.
But my other son is high performing, high test taker, computer science, elite program, top program, and everything, and he fits perfect and loves this stuff as well. But like there's this whole dimension of the human being that seems to be sort of missing in his education and curriculum, that when I talk to him, I can see them trying to introduce it at different places about, like, especially now that the AI conversation is coming up, what's the impact on human beings? What's the impact on society? And so they don't have great tools because they're all trained on how to program. But so I could see where a course like that would probably never fly at the institution, but the great need that you would have there. And not just like personal spiritual need, but a kind of intellectual need to think through matters beyond these immediately engineering kinds of questions.
And I do think, I mean, there's a lot of thinking in the course. I mean, that's the other thing I would say, is we're getting ready to start this book by Tomáš Halík. Do you know Halík?
I don't think so. Yeah.
He is a Czech theologian. He's really very interesting. I came to know about him because I was asked to review this book called Patience with God. And it's an extended reflection on the Zacchaeus story. He's Czech. He was ordained in the underground church, underground church in Czechoslovakia.
Oh, yeah.
He's a trained psychotherapist. And so we're going to read this book called Touch the Wounds, which is an extended reflection on the story of Thomas. And he begins by talking about that he could not believe in a God that didn't have wounds. And he talks about this. And it's philosophical. I mean, like his favorite philosopher is Nietzsche. So he talks about Nietzsche and his influence. Obviously, he has some disagreements. But he
still
also provides you with this really challenging questions. And I mean, one of the concerns I have is, I mean, you know, our students, I think many of our faculty see our students as quite privileged, and they are in many ways, or many of them are, not all of them. And yet, many of them, you know, have, you know, suffering. I had a student who was not going to be able to be in class because she just, her friend's mother, she was diagnosed with cancer, and then, like, by the end of the week, they said she had 3 days to live, and she died on Friday. Yeah. You know, and making sense of something like that as a young person, and this, you know, it's the age of her own mother. They, you know, were close. These are things that are difficult. Yeah. And you're saying, this was a good person. I loved this person. How do I understand this? And so one of the things I really try to help them think about is there really are going to be difficulties and things that don't have clear answers. And how do you continue? Because a lot of them want, you know, everything happens for a reason, or things like that. And sometimes it's pretty hard to figure out how God could have a reason to you know, take someone. You know, it's not a very, I don't know how to say this exactly, but a very flattering way to think about God, first of all. Yeah. And so how to really think about that. And of course, you know, the cross and the resurrection are central to our being able to at least think about that in ways that can help us, even though it remains difficult. So these are also the kinds of things that I really have a concern to help students think about. And there are many challenges that our students are facing, and they feel it deeply.
This is why I was attracted to teach college. It was formative for me. I did 1 year of middle school, and that's a lovely age, and those are gifted teachers. But
they are super gifted teachers.
Yeah, but not my calling. And I was called to college because it was this time where you had intellectually developed enough and had enough experiences that you could ask and think serious questions. And that was a powerful time. And then getting introduced into powerful ideas. Yes. I thought this was the magical sort of moment. And I remember that experience in college. I remember even my first few decades of teaching. But now I feel like so many things have shifted. so I'm shifting now to like the future of higher ed, because we have these students now that are, as you were talking about, like there's all of these really serious sort of issues, and even your high performing ones are, you know, they're doing you've got the people that have jobs and family responsibilities and trying to make it in college, but even your sort of high performing ones are in charge of clubs and trying to get their test scores up and trying to sort of get into grad school, and they have to have sort of stuff planned, all the way from like first grade all the way up sort of through. So I wonder sometimes if all the pressures surrounding education, higher education, kind of suffocate that possibility for the inquiry that humanizes us. So my question is, like, what is is there a future there in Catholic higher ed? What if it is? What is it?
So,
and I tell people I don't hold them to their responses because it is predicting the future.
I've read lots of people commenting about what the future was going to be. There were all these. By the 1980s, we're going to have women ordained in the Catholic Church. And I say, see, this is why you never, ever predict the future. Here's what I would say about it. We're at a point, and this is only my opinion. I am not in any way representing my university or our field or anything. We're at a point of challenge, I think, in ways that we have never been before. And, we can talk about AI, we can talk about all these other pressures, external pressures that have to do with our current political landscape, wherever one locates oneself on that landscape. And we need a vision for the future. That's what I would say to you. And what is that vision for the future? I mean, I'm not going to give you then here's the vision.
Here's the vision that's going to save us.
I wish I had it, and then we could just do it. And
I think if we had it, everybody would have jumped on it. Yeah.
Yes, right. And I think that one of the things I think about a lot is how old-fashioned my course is in some ways. We read and we write and we talk about it. That is basically the method in my course, which is pretty startling, I have to say. Wow. Maybe technology has it. One of the things I've been saying lately, maybe technology is advancing in all kinds of ways. And as I've noted to you already, I'm somewhat skeptical about AI because I've already lived through the promise of email. Remember the promise of email? Remember the promise of social media bringing us all together? Guess what?
Yeah.
It didn't quite work out that way. But, I use email. I rarely use social media, I have to say. It's just like no one needs to see the picture of my food that I ate last night, seriously. But what is the vision? And I think that we have much to offer in terms of that. And that's what I would say. And that vision has to be deeply communal and deeply not just human, but in light of, what Pope Francis says about everything is connected, and that we need a kind of serene attentiveness, or, I'm going to talk about this a little bit tonight, a long, loving look at the real. I'm not saying that we should just, put our heads in the sand about AI. I'm not.
Yeah.
But I think we also need to take a breath and think about the broader, what is it that we want to be? I think about our students and the ecology of our learning. And my story about how I went from physics to theology through circumstances that no one could have planned.
Yeah.
And this sort of over planning and being in this lockstep box. Like one of my students said to me once, well, Dr. Yocum, our parents expect us to be good at everything. And I looked at her and I said, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You're lucky if you're good at one thing.
Yeah.
But we have to figure out a way to help students learn how to live a life.
Yeah. I am so much in agreement with this.
And it's not, maybe this sounds so romantic, but I don't think it is. That's the question.
Yeah.
Do you want to say, darn it, at the end of my life, because I can see it's drawing closer. Is that, do I want to say, darn it, I didn't spend one more hour on the internet. Gosh, darn it.
Yeah.
Or do I want to say, I didn't get to have that one more conversation with my husband or with my grandchild or with my son or my stepdaughter, right? How do we live a life that, we want to have some comfort, we want to have some enjoyment and feel somewhat secure, and we want to help as many people as possible to feel secure in their lives. But that's the question. And how do we create an ecology of learning in which those things can happen? It's like I say to the students, take this reading and that reading and try to put them together. And they're like, what? But then they start making, and it's that we can offer. And in ways that a state institution, even though I did do Catholic studies at the University of Oklahoma, because of a professor that was willing to bend the rules, right? And that's what I think that it's like when you were talking about your work on hookup culture, you had this one other dimension that you could freely talk about. That's the ecology of learning that we have to think about. We have to think about it as our student is the sort of in that web, and how do we make that a living, breathing web? That's what I would say.
That's perfect. That's beautiful. Thank you very much. I can't end on anything better.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jason. This was really fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks.